You're watching The Globe. The international community is concerned about the resumption of fighting in Ethiopia between the Federal Army and Tigray rebels. The fighting ended a 5-month truce in the north of the country. The United Nations and African Union have called for restraint. The fighting broke out on Wednesday in areas of Amhara and Afar regions around the southeastern tip of Tigray.
The Ethiopian government has been blamed for starting a fresh outbreak of fighting between forces from Ethiopia's rebellious northern region of Tigray and central government forces. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sent troops into the northern region, accusing Tigray forces of mounting surprise attacks against military bases in the area. The 20-month conflict has left several thousands dead. According to the United Nations, more than 2 million people have been displaced. The conflict has also left thousands of Ethiopians living in near starvation conditions.
Well, for a little bit more on this, we're now joined by Horn of Africa specialist Abdullahi Boru Halakhe. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Always good to talk to you. This is a tragic development. I mean, just last week we were talking about talks moving towards peace and finding some common ground, but now it looks like 1 step forward, 3 steps back.
It is a grim situation, Peter. Over the last few months since the ceasefire, the expectation has been built that there will be a breakthrough. But instead, what we have is the government is accused of launching an operation in the Tigray region, and the Tigrayans, are accused, that is the TPLF, are accused of stealing fuel from World Food Program depot. During this lull, where there has been conflict has stopped, humanitarian aid has been coming in to Mekelle, but the problem was the fuel to transport them into other areas that are in desperate need. Now, with the fuel gone, the situation will get grimmer than it already is. Over 80% of the population in the Tigrayan region are not food secure. Almost 50% of the people in the Tigrayan region are in desperate need of food because there is severe food insecurity. Across the country, over 20 million people are in need of humanitarian aid. Just today, the regional observatory, IGAD, released a report that the next rain, which is the long rain in the region, will be below average. That will take us into 5 seasons without rain. So we're looking at a combination of not just man-made situation, but also natural situation, including drought, that would make the region really in a very, very desperate situation.
Both sides are going to blame each other for this latest round. Do we have any clarity about what might have provoked this resurgence of hostilities and fighting?
We don't know at the moment, but the underlying contextual reality is both sides. The TPLF has said that they are comfortable with the Kenyan-led mediation process that was supposed to be led by the outgoing Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. On the other hand, the Ethiopian federal government has said that they would prefer the AU route, and that has been really a big problem. That combined with the fact that the Ethiopian government, the federal government has said that they do not want any precondition. But on the Tigrayan side, it is very difficult for them to walk into political negotiation when millions upon millions of their people cannot access food, internet is blocked, telecom services do not operate, and banking services have not come online. So it's very difficult. So even before these, there were ominous clouds hanging on the horizon regarding the talks itself. Now that the conflict has broken out, because the Kenya's election has taken some time before it's going to be some time before the Kenya's election, presidential election row is resolved. You're looking at a situation where it looks bleak, not just from the humanitarian perspective, but also from the political negotiation perspective.
Had the African Union been making progress in trying to broker peace, or has it just been one of those processes that just takes so long, and then of course there's always the danger of seeing what's just happened?
It is very hard. You know, civil wars are very difficult by their very nature because it can end in, you know, a few ways. Number one, you know, the military battle's victory. If one side wins, it can impose its will. The other one is it can end via political settlement, and that process is very difficult naturally. It is even more in the case of Ethiopia, because Ethiopia and Addis Ababa is the political capital, or the diplomatic capital, if you will, of the African countries. So African Union is in Addis Ababa at the invitation of the Ethiopian government. So the idea that AU can mediate was always going to be incredibly difficult, because you cannot mediate in a security situation where the host country hasn't allowed you to do it. And for the TPLF, they've made it very clear. Obasanjo is not going to be impartial because of that, but also they believe that he is very close to the administration, and as a result, it's not someone that they are going to rely. But let me make one thing very clear too. African Union will only be as strong as the member states want it to be. And member states are not very keen for African Union to be stronger, because they know that if it takes a case and resolve it in a way that is not favorable to the administration in power at that particular time, that could happen to another country. So at the highest level, at the summit level, they are not very keen for African Union to be stronger or independent for that matter. Secondly, African Union is reliant on donors, particularly when it comes to its security, peace and security architecture. So when you do not have political support from member states, that is largely the states, and you do not have adequate funding because member states are not giving you enough money, and you're relying on the goodwill of external donors, you're always going to be in a very difficult position. So yes, African Union is struggling, but I think it's by design rather than by default.
What might be the consequences of this latest flare-up? You have a truce, you have this flare-up, anger gets welled up yet again, and I just wonder if it's possible to go back to the place of the truce, or have things escalated to make it much harder for them to get back to the table and discuss?
I think naturally we've got to be cynical, and there are good reasons since this conflict started for one to be cynical. But I remain optimistic that this situation will be resolved, but there are no easy answers. By November, this will be 2 years since this conflict started, and we've seen so many false dawns. I think all you're hoping for is the people who are really suffering right now, whether in Tigray, whether in Afar, whether in Amhara region, whether in the Oromia region, one, get adequate humanitarian access. The food that people desperately need needs to come in. That will be very, very important for all concerned. Whether the fighting continues or not is a completely different matter. But if that aid doesn't go in, Peter, the next few weeks and months will come, me and you will have this conversation, that a man-made catastrophe was allowed to continue. Secondly, simultaneous to that, there has to be a ceasefire. Without ceasefire, humanitarian groups would not be able to deliver their humanitarian aid. And the third one is there is a need for political settlement And as part of that political settlement, there has to be an accountability mechanism for the egregious human rights and humanitarian violations that has taken place over the last 22 months. If that is not going to take place, what will happen is these methods could be used elsewhere in civil conflict on the continent. We've seen a very clear case of food aid or hunger being used as a tool of war against the UN Security Council resolution, against Ethiopia's laws, and against AU's charter. So there are ways that people who are involved are held accountable, both at the individual level. We've had horrendous cases of sexual violation and sexual and gender-based violations. All those, if they are not held to account, I don't think we can sit here and say, we didn't know. And that has to happen at the command level as well as at the individual level.
Tell us about the region where this fighting is taking place. What's significant about this town of Kobo in this conflict?
It is significant in the sense that this is a town that has exchanged sides over the last few decades now. Initially, it wasn't part of the Tigray, but the Tigrayans say that this predates them coming into power in 1991, when the town was divided, and then one side went to the Tigrayan and the other side went to Wollo, but largely Amharas. So I think these are some of the issues that they have been allowed to fester for some time, and therefore it is coming now. It is finding its expression in this conflict. Land among some of these communities, but particularly between Amharas and the Tigrayan, is an issue, because every time one of those communities are in power, what happens is that land is appropriated. And then when the other community comes into power, it changes hands. And so, whereas, there are other causes that are at play here, I think land question, geographical contestation has also been at its heart. I just want also to refer, the viewers to the question around Al-Fashaga, which is in the Amhara region, but the Sudanese government claims as part of its territory. So it is both domestic as well as regional territorial, multiple regional territorial claims that is at the heart of this conflict. So what we are witnessing is a country that has for some time now fairly strong and stable and source of stability, whether for good or ill, now itself experiencing some of these problems. And I think it's going to be a while before it comes together and resolves this. There are within certain quarters, it has been made it's been suggested that Ethiopia needs Truth and Justice and Reconciliation Commission as part of political settlement in what is going on in the country.
Abdullahi, always great talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for your insights tonight. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Peter.
All right, that's one of our regular commentators, Abdullahi Boru Halakhe, speaking to us about this latest development. Tragic fighting has resumed between Tigrayan forces and the federal forces of Ethiopia. And we're monitoring that situation, a region where a humanitarian crisis has been building and growing for some time.